welcome to Procrastinate with Books. Since we are already halfway through the fall season, I thought why not update you upon the TBR prompts that we created at the beginning of the season. So, if you remember, at the beginning, we created this whole little prompt list where we were about to read books based on certain themes and notes based on these TBR prompts, and I have mostly got them covered, or at least to a larger extent. So if you're interested to see which books did I read for these prompts, keep on watching. For our first prompt, A Cozy World Buildup, I decided to pick Lenny Amongst Ghosts, which is a middle grade book. And nothing is more cozier for me than a middle grade story because it's lightweight, it doesn't have a lot of high stakes, and mostly the world setup is enough to maybe scare children or not. Unlike in this case, I thought by the title of the book the story is going to be really scary, but it wasn't. It was more on the humorous side. In fact, the story was pretty much short. Now, I did listen to the audiobook version of it, and by that, my main takeaway for you guys is that please read this book instead of going for the audiobook version because I personally did not enjoy the narration style that was adopted for the story. It felt a little ranting and a little rambling, sort of, at least for the very beginning part, and you really have to pay a lot of close attention to the story. Now, the story here is about a boy whose parents have enrolled him into a boarding school. Now, this boarding school is a very old German castle, and when he actually arrives there, he understands that things are very peculiar. The subjects that are taught, the pupils that he's hanging out with are not really normal, they are in fact ghosts. If you want to understand how Lenny is going to extract himself out of this tricky situation that he has landed in, you can read this book out. Now, for our next prompt was to read a book that has been on your TBR and it should be a series. Now, sadly, I have not completed the whole series yet, but there's still time for fall to end. So, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I may jump through this whole series of the Caravel series. And the whole system is pretty magical and whimsical, which I absolutely enjoy in the fall season. I think the vibes are totally perfect for the season, especially for September month, since we were just getting into that vibe and we were not really completely 100% into the spooky season yet. So I think magical is a good place to start the fall. And that's why I read this book. It is a very renowned book, so I'm sure most of you would already know about this series. There is a magical system where a particular host who nobody knows about may have never been face to face with them or may have been face to face with the host and they might not recognize them, and this host actually hosts a grand scheme of parties and where they have to basically find one particular person, and that's the whole mystery around it. But while you are actually trying to find that person, a lot of obstacles come your way and you have to get through those obstacles in this whole magical ecosystem where there are fays, there are bargains that are made in a very unusual sort of sense, and there's this one girl who has just simply come here to save her sister, and now she's understanding that it's her sister who is the main person that needs to be found out in this particular season. And now she just wants is that she can save her sister, take her back to her homeland, which was not so good place but still better than dying out here. The next prompt was to read a book by your favorite author, and I was confused between Lee Bardugo's Familiar or I should pick up the new book by Leonie Swan. So I went in with Leonie Swan because it's a nice detective sort of a mystery which is cozy, focused upon Agnes Sharp and her crew. Now, you already remember me raving about her last book, The Sunset Years of Agnes Sharp, last year. It was one of my top 10 books, I think one of the best mysteries with the folded scheme that was implied into the story, and this was a further next level story surrounding around the same cast of characters. So it was cozy, it was homely, the book was indeed beautiful. The murder mystery aspect is not very high stakes, so you can't be going in expecting a lot of clues, a lot of high stakes, or even a lot of plot twists. But from investigation purposes and the way Agnes reacts to different stories and the whole crew that's there surrounding her, all the people from the Sunset home are very peculiar, and each one of them adds such a novel angle to the story that it was definitely an entertaining read for me. The next prompt was to read a book with Fey magic in it, and for that, I decided to pick up The Courting of Bristol Keats. Now, this has been one of my anticipated books of the year, so I was really excited to pick this up in the very right season. The story about this book is about Bristol Keats, who is the key character, and she, along with her family members, siblings basically, is struggling to survive in the real world, and that is where she comes to know from unknown sources that her parents' death was not that of a natural cause, and one of them might still be alive. So she ends up bargaining with the Fae King that he might help her find out her parent, and she might help him out in the deeds that he wants. And that's where the whole story starts. And from here, you are transported into this whole world of Fae Kingdom where there are kings, fairies, bargains being made, and lot of treacheries, and even different portals into different kingdoms and sections. And amongst the fays too, there are different people who are really struggling and striving for the power. There are treacheries of court at play. So there are a lot of high stake fantasy related elements that were there into the story, which made it interesting. Now, for the next prompt, I had to read a bone chilling story which could go in either two ways to get me chill, at least from the bone perspective. Either I read something very ghostly of horror division, or I go for something in the murder thriller mystery section, which is very gruesome, and try that. So, since I've already read one ghostly story, I wanted to pick something else, and that's why I went for a murder thriller mystery in which I decided to pick one of my again favorite authors' work, The Christmas Jigsaw Puzzles. And these murders, I mean, the story here was around a very old puzzle maker who's very renowned. And she one day, I think in the beginning of December, receives a parcel at her door which contains few pieces of a big puzzle, and the whole big puzzle is supposed to show a big crime scheme, and those are actually the clues for who is the person to be dying out next. And before people actually die, she has to solve out that puzzle, who that pieces are basically pointing out to. And then once you get to know basically who is that person, you want to save them. But that's not such an easy task when you are an old lady struggling with a lot of different things in your day-to-day activities. But there is a fine reason behind the murder actually selecting this particular person, the puzzle maker, to solve these mysteries, because they have a connected past, which sadly the puzzle maker doesn't remember because of her losing memory and the age related problems. So that's what we figured out in this book. The story was fine, the mystery angle was so, I would say. I think I've read better works by this author, so this is not one of my favorite work by her. To cover up my next prompt, I had to read a book that had an animal on the cover, and I was trying to find something with a fox in it, but I couldn't, so I went with my next favorite animal, cat. And the story here is about the restaurant of lost recipes, and this is actually the second book. The first book is, I think, the Kamogawa Food Detectives, which is a Japanese food detective store, and this is just a continuation of a few more stories into the main book. It's like a compilation of different dishes and stories that are covered in chapter by chapter basis. So we get six dishes that the detective store really have to detect how they were made initially and find out the exact taste of the nostalgic memory that the other person has, or the person visiting the store, and they help people connect with their food related memories. So that's the theme of the book, still relates same. I think the nostalgia and those memories and the way they talk about, way the author actually talks about food in his book is very alluring, especially for a food lover like me. Now here's the trick: some books work better in audio format, some books work better in physical format. Fortunately for me, in this case, I think the audiobook version went on pretty great, because I'm not from the Japanese descent, and that's why a lot of the food that they were talking about, the accent, the words, even the character names, were not that easily remembered if I just read them in a book. But if I heard them in an audiobook, I was able to connect with the people and even the dish name and the things that they were talking about pretty easily. So this was a nice cozy detective mystery story around the food area, which was a good some read for me. Nice pick. So my next prompt was to read a classic book, and that should also have a movie adaptation, and I should also be watching a movie adaptation. So I initially wanted to go with something spooky like Dracula or Frankenstein, but I do recall doing that last year, I think, and I thought, okay, let's go with something that I really adore. So I read Emma for that very reason. It's light and easy book. The story is obviously well known, and for the movie adaptation, I actually saw the recent Emma version plus a Bollywood version, which is also adapted from the story of Emma by Jane Austen, which is Aisha. Now, a lot of you might not be well aware that Aisha was also a sort of adaptation from Emma's story itself, with the same high society girl trying to not mind her own business, making pairs, and then regretting later because they are entangled in different directions, and then finding a prince charming in the end, kind of a story. The wit was there majorly. I The movies, both of them were okayish. The book, obviously, one of my favorites, so it was great reliving the whole experience, and it also got me back on track on my reading too. Because once you reread something that you really enjoy and you relive that experience, you want to have more of it, and that definitely worked for me getting out of the slump. Now, fall is incomplete without witchy books, and to read a witchy book, I decided to pick The Witch of Colchis. Now, I thought this would be very witchy, and it was, because it did have certain magical elements to it, but it was majorly a story of a Greek mythology character, Medea, and her struggles all through her life, what she went through, how she became the person she is. And in that, she also had a shadowed element of one of her aunts, Circe. So her character appears there as well, and the whole story is relayed in a very novel fashion. Now, usually, I wasn't enjoying a lot of Greek mythology readaptations that were being launched these days, but thank God this wasn't one of them. Enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the decision making, and her strive to make her own place in the world. And even in the end, she did not go. She did not just vanish into thin air or disappear on the whims of a man. She went with a bang, which I really liked in this book. Coming to our final prompt, which was to read a graphic novel or a manga, I decided to pick the Spellbook Library because the title of the book fitted well in the whole theme of fall or autumnal vibes, and it was a graphic novel, so I decided to pick it. Sadly, I don't have a lot of things to suggest to you about this book because I ended up DNFing it on page 12, I think, majorly because I was not really interested in the graphics that were shown. It was okay. By no mean I am trying to disregard someone's work. This is just something that did not tally up with the kind of reading mood I was in, and so I decided to keep it aside rather than falling back into the slump out of which I have been able to recover myself so slowly that I really don't want to fall into a slump anytime soon. And for that reason, I DNF'd it and moved ahead with my life. So technically, I did pick this up, but I did not ended up finishing it. We still have 2 weeks left. Maybe we'll find something else. If not, this might just go unchecked for now. And these, my dear friends, were all the prompts and the books that I picked to cover up those prompts. And I'm actually glad that I did this challenge because it did help me a lot getting out of the slump and getting into the whole momentum of constantly reading back to back. Now I think I'm slowly recovering myself, and the speed is also coming back. Not pretty much as back in the day, especially in the first half of the year, but otherwise, I'm reading at a good pace. Right now, I'm able to cover up one book in 3 to 4 days, which is a good enough time for right now. But otherwise, let me know, how did you feel about the whole challenge? Did you try and cover up any of the prompts? Did you read any of the books this spooky season, or is there anything that you are really looking forward to read in this particular Halloween season now that it's coming up? And I'll catch up with you in my next video. Until then, keep your coffee strong and your TBRs long. Goodbye.